Hello and welcome to a video by AIA Contract Documents. My name is Mike Koger. I'm an attorney with the AIA Contract Documents program. Joining me on this video are Wolf Saar, John Mills, and Chris Lasky, three of the Documents Committee members who have been working on the documents that we're going to be talking about in this video. Those documents are the B111 2022 Owner Design Architect Agreement and the B112-2022, the Owner Architect of Record Agreement, and the exhibits that accompany those documents, including the E205 responsibility matrix exhibit. Over the last couple of years, we have been working to create those documents. We've been exploring all kinds of issues with regard to how two architects, a design architect and architect of record, work together on projects. This video is really to capture some of the all the stuff that we've been talking about and some of of our experiences, but also some of the background that went into the creation of those documents. As always, on any video that we do, we can't provide legal advice. If you have questions about specific legal issues that pertain to your projects, we always recommend that you contact counsel in your area that can help you out with your specific issues. So gentlemen, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to do this. The two topics that we're going to be talking about are pretty high level stuff. I mean, first of all, the first one is how are contracts typically structured on projects where you've got two architects? And then kind of a secondary issue that we'll get into a little bit later is how are design responsibilities allocated when you've got a design architect and an architect of record. There's plenty of nuance that we've talked about over the last year and a half about those things. So I'll start first by, just kind of going around the room and asking folks about their experience on projects that have involved two architects. Wolf, maybe I'll start with you first. I know you've done a handful of these projects, including some very complicated ones as well. So what's your experience on how contracts have been structured when you've been working with another architect on a project?
Sure. Most of the contracts that I've been involved with where there's a design architect and the architect of record have been multifamily, high-rise projects. They kind of fall into two categories. The one that is intentional and another one where the owner has made a decision partway through the project to designate the first architect as the design architect and then completely shift the project over to another architect as the architect of record. In the first example, though, where it's intentional, we've been in two different kinds of situations. One where the design architect is hired by the owner under a separate contract, and then we came in as the architect of record under a separate contract with the owner. So two contracts that the owner has. We did a second project with the same design architect, with the same owner, and in that case, the owner asked that we carry the contract as the AOR and bring in the design architect under our contract. So he had a single contract. The unintentional, or where there's an evolution of the project, that's happened a couple of times. One where we were asked to come into a project that was being designed by an out-of-town architect in Seattle. We're in Seattle. This architect was in San Francisco. They had done the initial design, but to get through city entitlements and such, we were brought in. So that one involved basically a hard stop for the design architect. When they finished design development, it shifted over to us and we took over the project, and any further design was done by us without the involvement of the original architect. The other one was one where we had been the design architect, intending to do the whole project, but partway through the project, just because of relationships and because of ease for the owner, they made a decision to terminate our contract at the end of design development after the project was entitled, and then bring in another architect to be the architect of record to complete the project. And like that earlier example, we did not continue on the project. We had no involvement after our design.
Gotcha. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that the intentional effort, when you were intentionally knew that you were going to be working on a project with another architect, it was a little bit easier of a transition and just an easier project to work on than the unintentional. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes. And where where we were integrated, it was all under our umbrella as the AOR, that was probably the ideal situation for us. But in both of those intentional situations, the design architect was known to us. We had a relationship, and it was actually a really great experience. We were able to embed the design architect into our office and participate almost like one of our staff members.
Oh, interesting. So that was the scenario where you were the architect of record, and then the design architect was a sub to you, and you felt that contract structure of just having a single prime with the design architect as the consultant was a preferable way to do things.
For us, for that project, yes, absolutely. Okay. It was smoother, and it was more like a traditional project, really. I mean, there was no, if there was an issue where the design architect was pushing for something, we had the conversation. He led our staff to do production, because this was a design architect that had a small firm, but great ability. So, we provided the horsepower even during design.
Gotcha. So, John and Chris, I'd like to bring you guys both into the discussion. Have you had experience with the single prime contract structure that Wolf's talking about, or the contract structure where you've got two separate prime agreements? Have you found either one of those to be preferable or a better way to do things?
Go ahead, John.
We have a developer client that we worked with quite a bit over the past few years, and we've done the same kind of building multiple times, and each time we've done a different contract structure. As the client's trying to figure out, what works best for them, right? So we originally were brought into an opportunity where the client had already hired a design architect to evolve the project. We were brought in later as a consultant direct to the client to provide AOR services on that project, because we had regional expertise in the area of the jurisdiction that the project needed to be processed. So that's why the client thought we brought value to the project, where the design architect was out of state. In the second rendition, the client decided to have us as the prime to them and bring the design architect under our contract, just so it gave a single point of contact with the client versus the client navigating with both a design architect and architect of record. Now it was all under our purview, and we certainly enjoyed that, because the synergy you get from working together as a team, I think really benefits not only our relationship and how we're evolving the design, understanding what the design issues are to be able to carry those through into the construction documents, but it's just easier for the client to manage and navigate. Now in the third rendition, they flipped it around, so now the design architect is prime to the developer, and now we're a sub-consult to them. It really doesn't make much difference to us because we've already had a relationship with this design architect, so it's a different way of structuring. But again, I think it's certainly simpler for the client to navigate with that kind of single point of contact to both the design architect and the AOR.
Absolutely. Chris, I know you are an architect, of course, but you come from a different side of the equation. You were more on the owner's side. Is that right? Can you tell us about your experience with these, hiring two architects to work on a project?
Correct. So our group is out of Boston, but we do work across the country, and it is our preference to have a single point of contact, a single architect who would then hire any additional services under them, but that's not always the case for a number of reasons. There may be as we look at new opportunities and new projects, we may have a favored architect or someone who we share a certain design sense with, who we've been using, who we will work with through the concept and the schematic phases to see if the project is viable, and they might be local to Boston, one of those groups. And then if the project does move forward, we would get an AOR in the local jurisdiction if it's in another part of the country. The other scenario might be if it is a specialized function, specialized program, and you could think wet lab space, hospitality, live music venue, those type of things where there's a real specialty, and we look at the feasibility of the project in one stage, and then if the project does move to that phase of actually getting the CDs together, executing the project, then we will look for somebody who's more familiar with the project's jurisdiction, both in how the permitting process works, but also has the relationship with the contracting community that carries a lot of weight. But by all means, the preference for us is to have a single source contract, and then have those ancillary skill sets downstream from them.
So I should mention that, during the development of the contracts that we've, the B111 and B112, our collective group, it seemed like, had more familiarity, just like we've all been talking about, with a single prime and a consulting role. And that seemed to be amongst our task group, like the predominant way in which, these kinds of two architect scenarios were handled. However, I was a little surprised. We went out and interviewed quite a number of practitioners, architects who did this kind of work, that were outside of our group. And I was surprised to hear that there were quite a few folks that we talked to that did the two prime agreement structures. And it seemed a bit more, once we started to get out of our group and listen to experience from other folks, that there were quite a number of projects that were done under the two prime agreement kind of a scenario. That was, and that's a little segue into the kind of contracts that we created with the AIA Contract Documents Program. I think we realized at a certain point that for the single prime and the consulting role, the existing documents that we already had, for example, the B101 or the B103 owner architect agreements, combined with a C401 architect consulting agreement, really could work pretty well for that kind of single prime and consulting role. But what we didn't have in our library was the two independent contracts, one with a design architect and one with an architect of record. Have any of you had any experience using a B101 or a B103 and then a C401 agreement as kind of the contract structure for a prime and sub-consultant role?
I'll step in. Definitely. That's to be honest, on that project where we were the AOR and had the design architect under us, we did not have a B101 agreement with the owner on that one. They had their own custom agreement. However, our contract with the design architect was a C401 architect consultant agreement.
And I would say that what we have done is one of the reasons that I'm really excited about these documents coming to market is because we would typically engage the design architect early on through almost a letter agreement on an hourly rate in order to get feasibility done and to push it as far as we need to, and then we would come in with the B101 and with the AOR, or if it's local, turn that into turn the DA into the AOR. But typically, when it is separate, there has been a little bit of a gap in the document series as to how you handle the DA, and we've seen it as really one-off documents that we're recreating project specific. What it doesn't allow for is it doesn't really spell out the collaboration to really get the benefit of having these two firms work together, and that's something that these new documents really focuses on and allows you to codify that relationship.
And like we have a number, I'll again go to some of our workplace developer kind of projects. We're all partnered up. We'll be doing a shell and core part of the project, but we'll have an interiors architect that the client has also brought together. And so we're often in this kind of scenario. We've got two architects that are primed to the client, but yet we're being asked to navigate and work together. And that's why I really enjoy about the documents we've created, the E205, this kind of scope matrix where we kind of define what the different parties are going to be doing and bringing to the table. It's really hard to navigate our relationship and servicing the client when you don't have that in place. So I think our document suite right now has that, and I think it's going to be really useful for everyone to come together and be able to work with each other in defining where we have overlap and where we want to avoid duplication, and just a more efficient way that we can service our clients. And for the clients, it's just a more organized way to deliver service in a project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, for me anyway, that's the best outcome of our work together on these documents, is that responsibility matrix where there's a definition of who does what and how we work together. We definitely could have benefited from that on another project I didn't talk about, where we had we really had the contract for design and architect of record, but our client wanted us to team up with another architect from out of town for some kind of early design concept work and a little bit of follow through on their part. We would have loved to have that. We were struggling for weeks trying to develop a document that did what this does, but we were going from scratch. So this is, I think, the best thing. And certainly we would apply it to a C401 if we're doing it that way, or it would obviously apply on the separate design architect and architect of record agreements as well.
Gentlemen, now that we're talking about the E205, I'm going to try and share my screen and see if I can't. I'll be curious to see how the recording actually does this, but I'm going to pull it up. Okay. I assume the three of you can actually see it.
Yes.
The real trick will be whether or not it shows up on the video.
Right, you can always splice it in.
Exactly.
Actually,
I'm going to kind of tweak what I just did there, because I've got two screens. Okay, so I assume you guys can see now this. This is the first page of the responsibility matrix that we've created. It's the E205, and what we've done is we've taken, just kind of for a basic layout perspective, we've taken a lot of the services that really came from the B103 owner architect agreement for a complex project, put them all in the left-hand column. And so the services that you'll see in the left-hand column here track pretty closely with that B103. And the idea is, if you're an owner and you are using the E205 to define the scope of services of your two architects, that you'd be pretty confident that so long as there's someone responsible or designated as responsible for each of these tasks in the left-hand column, you're effectively getting the same services that you would get if you would have hired one architect to do the entire project. So that's at least one way we've thought to help safeguard against there being scope gaps or things that are missing that you might have otherwise gotten if you had just hired one architect. Of course, the middle two columns are where the responsibilities can be selected amongst the two architects, so the design architect and architect of record. You'd either check, who's the responsible party, who's going to be assisting the responsible party, and then if someone has no responsibility, you'd also put an in there as well. Of course, if nothing is included, if no designations are included, then there would be no responsibility. That would be the default for that. And then if there's any clarifications for how the two architects are supposed to share responsibility for something, or if there's an assist responsibility, then that should be clarified and explained in pretty good detail in the clarifications section. Wolf, I want to, something you said very early on was you were differentiating between a hard transfer of responsibility and kind of blended type of services. So of course this E205 is all about blending services where you've got a design architect and an architect of record who are really doing work throughout the project. It's definitely different than the hard transfer that you were mentioning earlier. Can you kind of take us through some of the not to put you on the spot, but can you take us through some of the pluses and minuses of those and kind of give us the differences between how those work?
Sure. On the hard transfer, it's not really a collaborative model. It's very clear, or I think it's very clear. The design architect has their scope and they negotiate that with the owner. The architect of record develops a scope and negotiates that with the owner. And the link is what we call a transfer package. And a transfer package is really, it could be the BIM model, it could be a set of drawings and outline specifications, those sort of things that would constitute a transfer package, which the design architect gives to the owner and the owner gives to the architect of record and says, here's where we left it, now pick it up from here and develop this design. And, in my experience in that situation is absolutely not collaborative. We picked it up and we actually started to make changes because there were issues with the marketability of some units and such. And so we just kept going. And I think the owner got a very good product, but it was not a collaborative one. The responsibility matrix is such a great tool for collaboration, which is our preferred approach. I know that on occasion we team up with architects, for something like Chris mentioned, I think lab sort of projects and where we need more expertise. I should also mention that everything I'm talking about is regarding our firm. In the past few years, we've recently merged with into a larger national firm, so that those elements don't apply as much. Although that national firm that we are now part of often collaborates with other architects right at the RFP stage, where we team up with an architect that has a strength in one area, we have a strength in another area, we team up to do it collaboratively. And again, the E205 is a wonderful tool for establishing responsibilities because there's so much opportunity for overlap there.
And I would add to that that's, well, first of all, that's a great point, that our RFP stages and putting the right team together to really strengthen chances to get that done, both from design expertise and the ability to actually execute the project can be key. But every project's different, right? And to have a hard and fast set of rules, like this is what the design architect does and this is what the AOR does, and there's a fine line, and never the two shall breach that that line just isn't living in reality. And what the E205 does in a very elegant way is allows you to really customize what this relationship is for a specific project. And I think that that's really where this document's going to shine, or where this family of documents going to shine, is that versatility to be able to metamorphosize into whatever the demands of the current project are.
Yeah, we have a number of education clients, and as Wolf mentioned, in the RFP stage, we'll often partner up with another firm that just brings a unique expertise. And I'm thinking of one recently that the firm in Texas had some really exceptional kind of lab experience. And while we had that, nothing at the level that this other firm had. So really, the partnership really made sense. And I wish we had this 205 when we were trying to bring together the relationship, because it would make it so simple. So we kind of created our own, if you will, a few months ago. But I mean, to now have this kind of E205 available, it's a great checklist to make sure we've got everything covered in the project. I think it's a great checklist also for the owner to be able to identify when there's scope gaps, when either the AOR, the design architect, are taking on a specific responsibility. It's a good checklist for the owner to say, hey, I've got a missing piece here. How does this get filled? I need to go outside to get another consultant, or can one of the AOR or the DA take that on? So anyway, I think the flexibility of the suite of documents is really outstanding to serve any kind of number of scenarios that we encounter.
Another aspect about the E205 is, I mentioned overlap, and it definitely defines, the responsible party, but it also has a definition of assistance, because there are situations where the design architect in this collaborative model would still be involved, down the road, all the way through construction administration. And it's an opportunity to really define where those places are, where the design architect would be involved later in the project than their kind of primary schematic design development. And the same applies for the architect of record, because if, assuming that the architect of record is hired early in the project, they may have involvement in some of those early stages just to, be up to speed and be participating in scheduling and all those things. So very helpful in those aspects.
Yeah, I'll say that the E205 is definitely a different document for our program. Normally, the way we create documents is, if you pull a B101 off the shelf, you got a lot of stuff to fill in, and you might negotiate some things, but in large part, it can be used without heavy editing. I think the E205, we recognize very early on that it's going to have to be engaged with. Like there's certainly some things where you're going to have to describe in that clarification section how one party is going to assist the other, because it might be different on, just every project, like Chris said, is going to be a little bit different. So that those roles might be the manner in which the design architect assists the architect of record in a particular phase or in a particular item. It's gonna be different. So you're probably going to have to do a pretty good amount of customization to the document. I like that because I think makes it a very flexible document. Also, another thing to point out about the E205, it should be a common exhibit. So if you have a owner design architect agreement and an owner architect of record agreement, the same exhibit should be attached to both. So it has that common set of expectations to it. One other thing to point out about that scope that we've talked about a lot over the last year or so is we resisted the urge to try to insert every little nuanced thing that or activity that the architects might do. So some responsibility matrix, and you guys are going to be way better at talking to this point than I am, but some responsibility matrices you'll look at will have every little submittal, not every little drawing type that's got a check mark somewhere. This is the way we've crafted this document is that it is major categories of responsibility, and to the degree there's finer tuning of who does what particular type of drawing, that's something that would have to be added into the document. Anyone have any additional thoughts on that? Did I summarize that right?
Yeah, I would first, to go back to what you first said about having to engage this. I think that's a welcome activity. I think that a lot of times people feel, the parties to the contract feel that, oh, I know exactly what the architect does. I don't need to go through all this. I know what the responsibilities are, but this sort of requires the parties to sit down and really understand, how the project progresses through and what the activities are that you need to get to certain milestones. I think that's having that be a necessary activity just provides clarity and gets everybody on the same page so much earlier, especially when you have multiple prime contracts.
Right. But Mike, I do appreciate that it's not 30 or 50 pages long of checklist items. So I mean, it hits the primary issues that we most commonly find in our projects, and then you can edit it, right? You can add notes and add to it as you need to. Again, to be able to customize it is a really nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, we started out with the B103, and we've talked a lot about B101 as really the B103 is what we tend to use on our projects. They really puts the responsibility for hiring the cost consultant and the scheduling consultant on the owner, rather than the architect doing that. I think it's a good basis. And the way that the AIA document B103 is set up, it doesn't get into the real specifics. It's sort of a kind of a more high level assessment of all the tasks and such. So I think John mentioned that we have that whole column of clarifications and such. That's a great tool. And then as others have mentioned, you can always edit it and add more detail if you wish. But we've kept it kind of at that B103 level, so it's accessible. It doesn't become a project in itself to fill it out. It's actually a great tool to start the conversation and continue it.
And I would add, it's not only imperative to get those roles and responsibilities, set up prior to the project, but also you want to be speaking to the contractor with one voice. There's other parties involved in this that need to have some clarity as to who's really running this project at different phases, so that everybody understands where that authority and responsibility lies. And this family of documents does it rather spectacularly, I will add. in my humble opinion.
Your humble opinion. Hey, Mike, I wanted to go back. I mean, I think we all enjoy working in that kind of blended environment where we're partnering up as a team. But I think that, again, the flexibility of documents, I want to go back to the hard transfer kind of approach, because it is fairly common. Again, I'll go back to a lot of our education clients have to go through a relatively complex entitlement process or have to wait for bond measure funding. So they only want to take the project to a certain level to be able to go out and fundraise it or go through an entitlement process. So either taking it through SD or through design development makes sense. They're not ready to commit or go forward with the project. So I think the documents are structured that way. And I think we haven't talked about the Exhibit A's to the B11 or B12, but that provides that opportunity to define, what's going to be done, what the transfer package might look like once the project moves forward. So again, the flexibility of the documents, again, can really address any number of kind of project scenarios.
Yeah, John, you absolutely read my mind. Yeah, definitely don't want to lose in all this that, that E205 exhibit is only one option. The other option is those, if you were to look at B111 and B112, they have two different ways to structure the architect's services. One is the responsibility matrix. The other is what we're calling the Exhibit A documents, which is for the B111, it's the design architect's scope of services, which has the design architect taking the design through the design development phase. And then the B112 has the architect of record services effectively picking it up from that point and carrying it forward. I think we all know, and we've talked to a lot of folks who've had very different, ways in which these contracts are structured. You can certainly imagine a scenario where a project, the design architect completes their services after schematic design, and then they hand it off from there. We picked design development as a more common way, but it's just one option. There are many other options or ways to structure that handoff. Wolf, I'm curious, in the instances where you did a hard handoff, did you go through? I think you mentioned you went through DD phase, right?
We did. And that was driven by the entitlements process with the city of Seattle and in our situation, where really you have to get into a design development level to get to the point where you can get an entitlement. The other part is cost. As I mentioned, this is B103 basis, and we did work with a B103. The contractor was brought in as a cost consultant, early on in the project. And we have CM documents that do that too, but we use the B103, and that we were able to get the owner to a point of feeling more comfortable about the cost based on a design development level of documentation. So as we transferred it all over to the architect of record, we were able to give them sort of a good grounding in continuing the project, that this is a feasible project for the owner.
We spent a lot of time on the tricky part of this is the transfer, right? Whether it's a SD or DD. So we spent a lot of time making sure it's very detailed in terms of the deliverable that the DA would be providing and how that transfer would occur, and the importance that there need to be some kind of in-person meetings, if you will, or a transfer kind of meeting where we sit down and kind of give the DA an opportunity and the client an opportunity to walk through the project and explain that to the AOR. And then also assigning responsibility to the AOR to do a due diligence and taking a look at that transfer package early on and making sure that they identify the issues or complexities that maybe weren't foreseen before. So again, it's really structured to provide what is a tricky situation, but really make it kind of methodical and logical, and try to avoid any kind of gaps that might occur or misunderstandings in the way that it's structured.
Absolutely. So we're getting towards the end of the hour, and I should probably start to wrap up. One thing I do want to mention, though, is we've been talking about contract structures for two different architects. Notably absent from this video is any discussion of joint ventures. We do, as a documents committee or as a documents program, offer the C101 joint venture agreement. That's kind of a specialized, way in which two design professionals are going to join forces to seek a project. So refer to that C101 if you want to know more about joint ventures. Also, international agreements. A lot of times, it's pretty common for American architects to do earlier design work on a project that's in a foreign jurisdiction, and then have a local architect complete, the design in some way. We have an entire set of documents, our international documents, that are the B161, and there's a very thorough guide that you can find that deals with a lot of the nuances of international documents. There's certainly some things and some concepts and issues that overlap, but international documents are kind of their own. Have their own set of unique features to them. So gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and close us out unless you have anything else to mention before I hit that record button a second time.
I would just add we're also working to put together a guide that, I think will really, there's so much nuance to this kind of thing in the relationship. So I think our guide will be really helpful to those that maybe haven't done this before, to really understand the documents and how they interrelate and the different approaches, and how the suite of documents is, able to accommodate a number of different scenarios. So I think that'll be helpful for everyone.
I would add that, you look at where the industry's going, and through technology and through just the culture of it, it is becoming more collaborative. So tools like this continue to again help codify how those relationships work and how people can come together with some peace of mind that it's been structured in a complete and accurate way. So I think these documents definitely further that push to collaboration.